right, welcome back to the second episode of FHIR and the Art of the Possible. I'm Nolan Kelly, Chief Customer Officer at 1upHealth.
And I'm Kevin Yamashita. I lead our advisory services organization here at 1up. And we're really excited to be here today. Nolan, it's really cool that we're doing this. There's so much going on. So much has changed since the last time we talked.
A lot has changed. We have new regulations that have come out in the industry, a lot of movement in the market, and some pretty exciting stuff. So, Kevin, as we were preparing for this time in front of the camera,
Preparing, that's generous.
what are we going to talk about? How are we going to play this? And we had this very interesting conversation that was like, what a moment for us to even be able to do this, right? And like, kind of how cool is this? And that brought us back to a video that I shared with you from almost 10 years ago, where
Is it really that long ago?
It was 9 years ago, where my oldest son, the first time we brought him to a big box retailer, we were in Walmart and allowed him to walk around the toy aisle. And I videoed this, and it was this experience, like the wonderment of life through the eyes of an innocent 3-year-old who couldn't get over all of the toys and the coolness of it. And this like very demonstrative moment, this wonderment and this amazement. And he was walking around and just saying like, this is the coolest. Can you believe it? Like, how cool, just the sort of opportunities that were in his eyes were amazing. And I just thought that was like, what a moment at that time, but we're at that moment now. When we crosswalk that moment, that video to kind of today, this is the coolest, right? Like, can you believe it?
We made it.
We made it.
Like we've made this. All these things that we've dreamed about, all these things that we thought could happen, all this speculation about what will the government do and how will the industry respond. Like, it's happening.
Yeah.
And it might not be happening today, and it might not be happening tomorrow, but in, as they say, the long arc of history, the pendulum is swinging this direction. If we just wait, we're going to make it in the end zone.
Right.
That's crazy.
So let's talk for a few minutes. Like, what are, this whole concept of, can you believe it? This is so cool, right? Like, what are the cool things that are going to happen, that can happen now as a result of the catalyst of these regulations?
Yeah. So for those of you that are just tuning in, let's backtrack a little bit. We now sit in a world where there are, FHIR capabilities on the provider side. And not only are those baseline capabilities in place, but now the government is saying, you know what, the data that you expose, we're going to crank it up a couple levels. You have to share more and more data. And there's a roadmap for how, these subsequent versions of the USCDI and this clinical data that we can extract from EMRs via FHIR, that payload gets larger and larger and larger.
Right.
And that's really cool. Then on the payer side of things, we have this world where payers have been converting some of their, data to FHIR. And now the government's finally saying, well, you know what, all that data that you've been converting and storing, now you have to share it.
Right.
Hold on a second, right? Like, we're actually going to use FHIR to interoperate?
That's the plan.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I think of it as we've been in this mode where this has kind of been a tax. A lot of our customers have thought about this investment in FHIR and FHIR APIs as a tax. Now it's an investment.
Yeah.
Right.
They've been running around, the gym. They've been running around the field.
Right.
Doing laps.
Yeah.
Laps are boring. They're boring. Now they're going on a long hike. And we're going to see some things. We're going to go some places that we haven't been before.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
So what are we going to see, right? Because we're moving from a world where data was transformed and could leave an environment one member at a time for health plans, right out to the third-party applications, to an environment where you actually have to consume data from other health plans, bring that data into your environment, mix that data alongside the data you're creating through claims and clinical events that are happening with your members, create data classifications, expose that data to other payers, to providers, hopefully to vendors, right? And to actually start to create this data liquidity, if you will, right? But it has to be usable.
Yeah. What are we going to see? We're just going to see a couple things. Let me give you a couple of my thoughts. And
Is your head cold?
Well, no, my head's going to explode, right? With all the possibility. I'm worried I'm going to lose track. I think we're going to see a couple things. Like, first and foremost, right? This changes the way that organizations operate, right? Mm-hmm. Because the beauty of, the payer regulations is that while we put this infrastructure into place, you can use this infrastructure for other purposes, which means as you have, different TPO arrangements with data distribution partners, you can use all this tech that you're putting in place, right? So we're not talking just about, I can share data with other payers and I can share data with other providers. But there's this whole other world of data trading partners, digital health companies and application companies and other parts of technology within the enterprise. The idea that now we can leverage this investment and start to move data to some of those applications, data that is potentially higher quality, data that's more timely, data that's more comprehensive because it's joined, that's really interesting to me. We're finally going to start to see perhaps a real longitudinal personal health record. Right? When we think about the ability to aggregate different touches over different payers over the life of an individual, that's really interesting. And finally, I think the last piece of this that kind of pulls at me is this idea that we're starting to see payers right now lean into this idea that if we're going to have to do this for our CMS-backed lives, let's do it for commercial too.
Yeah.
That's a game changer.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's funny. We have this conversation a lot with our customers. The people who work on these projects with us don't even get to benefit from it because a lot of the health plans are only using it for the CMS lives, but that is starting to change. And it's starting to change. We talked about this on a recent webinar we hosted about the regulations. It's a competitive advantage, right? Like enabling data to be made available to members is can be viewed as a competitive advantage. And then beyond that, operating through bulk data transactions, opening up real-time access to data to the data trading partners that you talked about, that is an operational advantage, right? And so now you can think at a macro level about how are you using this infrastructure to change truly the data transactions, data acquisition, data management, right? And data distribution.
And what I think is so interesting about this moment in time is we have a better view of where the industry is going and where some of the market forces are pushing us.
Yeah.
If we go back to the patient access days, circa 2020, 2021, well, of course, we're also distracted by COVID. That was such an interesting time to be putting all that together. But secondarily, we didn't really know how these pieces were going to fit together. We had a sense of the shape and the outline, but it was really hard to say, this is how this data set will land, and this is how we'll use, and this is how we'll improve outcomes.
Yep.
We have that view now. And because we have that view, and because we have this, remarkably decently long runway, right, there's opportunity for, those, forward thinkers, those fast movers to make their investments now and to reap some of the compound interest, right? Like, you don't need to wait for 1/1/27 to put these things in place. You could be live in a year and a half, and you can get a year and a half of, advanced work put in to modernize your processes and be more responsive to your customer needs and provide nudges to, individuals as receiving care, to actually do all these things to differentiate yourself as an organization, as a health plan.
Yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
I don't know if we will have spliced the video in, but I'm going to take you back to that kind of big box for a second. You're this 3-year-old, you're looking around. Can you believe it? This is so cool. And this is so cool. If you're that kid, what are you going to take off the shelf first? Like what's the first toy you're going to take down and why is that so cool?
Oh, that's a hard question. There's so many things. One of the really easy ones that comes to mind is just being able to do better modeling of what we think is going to happen with our patient cohorts, right? With health insurance, so many times folks come on and off the plans every year, every 2 years, every 4 years, right? So you really never have this view of who this person is. But suddenly with payer to payer, the idea that when someone joins your plan, you could know what maintenance drugs are they on, right?
Yeah.
What, ER visits have they had? What major inpatient stays have occurred in the past 2 years? If you're an organization trying to plan your financial future in this economic climate, that's really important information for you to have and to be thinking about. So I think there's one level of really just like forward-looking analytics you can start to lean into. But on the flip side of things, one of the things that gets me really excited is just the ability to actually impact patient care in a meaningful way. Sounds so silly, doesn't it? Because that's what this is all about.
Yeah, sounds important.
But I think about some of these basic things. We have, provider directories and formularies and, EOBs and encounter information. How can we help our customers, payers, individuals find the right care at the right providers at the right time in the right places? We actually now have all this information coming together. We have the provider directory information up to date. We know the formulary list. So when we see things happening in real time, we can make a nudge and say, oh, you really should be getting this drug. Oh, you should be really seeing this physician who's closer with better quality scores. We just didn't have the timely data before this to do these things.
Right.
And what's so magical about this point in time is it's no longer all incumbent on the health plan. They can lean on their partners to do this work using the infrastructure they put in place.
Yep.
That's the real game changer in my mind.
Yeah. What do you think about moving towards, non-proprietary data, getting off of X12, right? And allowing what I'll just refer to as a much broader skill set, right, of the employees in the industry who can come in and actually develop on and touch and interact with this data. That in and of itself really should be changing the game in terms of who can come in and who wants to come into the healthcare industry, who wants to work with healthcare data. Before, it was such a niche and like unique, cumbersome, clunky experience. This really should open up into a new world of new way of thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we use these buzzwords, democratization of data, so much, but that's really what we're seeing. It's like the ability for folks that have a certain skill set, a much more common skill set, to actually engage with this stuff, right? Yeah. This is no longer a special tome that sits on the shelf that only one person can read and understand. This is now in common English that everyone can absorb and think about and respond to. That's really interesting. Not only are we able to get, different minds starting to look at these things, we're able to use tools that already exist, right? Like now we can use common commercial capabilities to solve healthcare problems.
Yeah.
Like all these cloud services that have existed, all these, point solutions and, application libraries and tool sets and accelerators have existed that have built the internet. Now we can apply to healthcare. I mean, the economies of scale there are incredible.
Right.
Yeah. And that's even before we start to talk about getting these things in front of business users that can actually solve problems because their data is more accessible. It's more understandable. There's better semantic labeling and, a better data dictionary, and it's more consistent and observable and all these other things. Like we trust the data more and it's more usable. I'm so excited.
I love it. Well, I'm excited as well. And, I'll just share with you the conversations we've had in the market with customers and with prospects over just the last couple of weeks have really elevated. They feel like they're much more sophisticated. We're looking further out into the future, having conversations around, all right, now that we know where we're going to be able to acquire data from, where we have to exchange data to, how we need to think about the evolution and the advancement of our data operations. The conversations are more fun, right? You start to innovate and start to think creatively. And that's what has me excited about looking at, sort of all the toys on the shelf now.
You hit the nail on the head, right? Like if we fast forward 5, 6, 7 years into the future and imagine a world where the regs are in place and the infrastructure exists. And now all these things that we wanted to do that we weren't able to do because the whataboutism and the naysayers and the technology problems and all that friction. Imagine a world where that friction's gone. And we can actually have these fun conversations about, I have these APIs. I know the data's there. I know it's timely. I know it's of decent quality. I know I have the security restrictions figured out and the data use rights in order. Now I can just go.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to wrap this up. I want to tease the next episode, which we haven't even really talked about what we're going to do at that point. But this is such a moment of excitement and energy, right, around the art of the possible, as we've named this. But there's also a lot of issues that are happening out in the market. You can pick up some headlines and understand the Q4 performance and the Q4 headwinds of our Medicare Advantage plans that are out in the market. There's just a tremendous amount of noise in this industry around how healthcare is operating and the challenges and cost and payment reform and all of the above. And so we'll get into some headlines, but I want our next conversation to be less about the art of the possible and more around the art of the necessary, which is, okay, let's now come back to planet Earth. What needs to change now to help this industry be sustainable? Because right now, we're on a tough track.
I think that's a hugely important thing for us to unpack.
Okay.
If organizations are not careful, there may not be a 5, 6, 7 years down the road to wait for all this to come to fruition. There's a lot of stuff we need to talk about now that really solidifies folks' places like in this utopian future.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the competitive dynamics are changing quickly. So, all right. Well, hey, thanks for sitting down today. Thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to catching up again in the future.
Cheers.